dedicated his... I'm actually glad my camera's not working for Joe right now, but do you think that as a dad and as a guy who dedicated his life to really what I thought was doing the right thing, being a police officer and being a Secret Service agent, that doesn't hit me right in the gut, that I didn't read that and I was sitting on a train and I didn't get choked up? I'm trying to fix this too. I'm doing my best. I just want to do what works. Because the irony is the individual who sent me the email said at the end, was insinuating that the purpose of the email was that these kids had no way to defend themselves. That these kids were just, there was nothing they could do. And I'm just encouraging you to understand that I'm simply trying to give a fighting chance to people who aren't going to have a fighting chance otherwise, to the evil among us. I'm not doing this for any other reason. I get paid by other folks for my opinion. They don't pay me and tell me what to say. Ever. You understand what I'm telling you? Ever. Under any circumstances. You tell me what to say. This is folks, we have the second biggest conservative podcast in the country. You think I'd say this on my show if I didn't mean it? Where I work, and you know who I work for, you tell me what to say, I'm out. I say what's in my head, and I am genuinely trying to help here. All right. Having said that, I brought this up in the past too, folks, with everything going on with Twitter and the silencing of conservative voices out there. Mm-hmm. Folks, sadly, it may be time to seriously look at what a conservative economy would look like. I mean, I don't know how much longer this can continue, where the mainstream media, folks out there like Media Matters and others, these groups that are anti-First Amendment, anti-free speech, that are active police state supporters, some of them. I don't know how long this continue, and I want to just leave it at this. I know because I had some notes to get to, and I wanted to be sure you understood it, that at some point in the future, we may have to go to a subscriber model here, because I don't know if you understand how nasty what's going on behind the scenes really is. It's not just me, folks. It is a number of the problem. If any of you are interested in conservative podcasting or conservative commentary or liberty-based commentary or being a constitutionalist and having a public profile, let me just warn you right now. As your profile grows, you will find yourself under relentless assault by people who are absolutely committed to silencing your voice. And the more your voice is spread around on social media and through your podcasts and television appearances, the more they will try to silence you. It's Pravda-like, but it is very, very real. The pressure is intense. The pressure is sometimes it's a lot to deal with for me and others. I spend about 20% of my time dealing with nonsense not related to content of the show, but dealing to the police staters on the left who want to shut us up all the time. So at some point, I don't know if, I'm trying desperately to keep this show free, but I just want you to understand in the future, it may not be possible because the assault is endless. They are trying to stop everyone and anyone who presents even a mildly alternative viewpoint from speaking out. Okay, sorry, folks, about the long-winded beginning. My apologies, but I just want to be honest with you about what's going on behind the scenes. It will not stop. All right. I got a lot more to get to today. There's some fascinating data I saw. A listener of the show sent me, I get a lot of great articles on email, but this one was fascinating. It was an article about some of the more disingenuous talking points out there about gun control, which are not going to make us safer. Keep in mind, Joseph, just to be clear, 30,000 feet. We are talking about things I absolutely believe in my heart, in my soul, with every fiber of my organic matter, that will make you safer, and I want to fight against things that will not. there are some disingenuous talking points out there about gun control that I want to debunk. And one of them is the comparisons they make to make the U.S. look like a violent country full of killers. These comparisons are inaccurate. So hat tip to the viewer. Hey, before I get to that, today's show brought to you by our friends over at iTarget as well. Speaking of firearms, folks, if you're going to have one, you really have to learn how to fire it accurately. Anybody can fire a firearm. The question is, can you fire it and be accurate with it at the same time? You know, dry firing is a great way to practice your trigger control, your sight alignment, especially your grip in the back. When I was a Secret Service agent, we did a lot of dry firing. Now, obviously, you got to make sure it's safe. Check it twice, check it 3 times, lock that slide open or open up that barrel. Look, listen, feel, as I say, stick that pinky down there, make sure there's nothing in there. And the iTarget Pro system, they will send you a laser bullet. The laser bullet goes in the firearm you have now. You have 9mm, you have 40 caliber, 38, whatever it may be. And when you depress the trigger, it'll hit the rubber backer on the laser bullet, and it'll emit a laser onto a target that they send you, and you get to see where your rounds go. My father loves this thing. I get tremendous reviews on it because it allows you in the safety and security of your own home to take your dry fire practice to the next level. Competitive shooters dry fire 10 times more than they live fire. It's hard to get to the range sometimes, folks. You know, it's expensive. It's great to go, but you have to clean the weapon. You have to buy the ammunition. It gets to be tough sometimes. Check out the iTarget Pro system. It's the letter I. It's itargetpro.com. That's itargetpro.com. And if you pick up the product, you'll get, I'll give you a promo code Dan. It's my first name, DAN, for 10% off. It's itargetpro.com, the letter itargetpro.com. Go check it out. I get really tremendous reviews about this by people who've really worked on and perfected their skills. Okay. So someone sent me an article from Mises.org, which is a really terrific website about the comparisons made between the U.S., Joe, and what they say is developed countries. And the liberal talking point here is that, hey, folks, listen, the U.S. is a violent country because when compared to other developed countries, you see the U.S. Gun homicide rate is really high. Well, let me just quote to start this off. Let me quote the Mises.org piece, and it'll be in the show notes today, appbongino.com. And let me humbly beg your forgiveness. I forgot to put the Cato piece I talked about the other day in the show notes. I hate when I do that. It'll be in today's show notes. The Cato piece, just to rewind a bit, is a piece about, are the statistics on, quote, mass shootings accurate? Are they really going up? And it's a short piece, but it's you need to look at it because you need to understand the data before we can make, legislative proposals, okay? So the Cato piece will be in there today. But I'll put this Mises.org piece in there as well. And here's a quote from there. It says, nevertheless, we've heard it all too many times to count. The gun laws in the United States are insane, quote, because countries like Sweden and Luxembourg have far more restrictive gun laws and are much safer because of it. The U.S. has the highest murder rate in the, quote, developed world, presumably because of its lax gun laws, we are told again and again and again. Now, the author of this piece makes a terrific point, Joe. He says, well, why are we comparing the United States to largely homogeneous societies like Japan, Sweden, and Luxembourg, when in reality, Joe, diversity, right? It's all about diversity. When you take into account the ethnic and cultural and racial diversity of the United States, a more appropriate comparison amongst the, quote, developed world would be Mexico, Venezuela, Russia, other countries. But they're left out, Joe. Now, why do you think countries like Mexico, Russia, and Venezuela would be left out in a comparison of gun homicide rates and then, quote, gun deaths around the world? Well, I'll give you the answer.
All right.
Because they're much higher in those countries. And, of course, it would make the U.S. look relatively safe in comparison. Now, folks, I know I encourage you often to read pieces I put in the show notes. And, again, I understand that, it's not – it sometimes sounds a bit self-sorry. Go to my website, read. But they're not my pieces, okay? This is a Mises.org piece. I don't benefit from it. I just want you to read it because it's a really, really well-done piece. And what he shows in there – the author of the piece, he puts in there how they pre-select, Joseph. They pre-select the, quote, developed countries,
Yes.
and they pick the ones that have these unusually low, quote, gun death rates. But the ones that have, this is just typical liberal, gobbledygook designed to confuse you into thinking that gun control is some method to make you safer when I'm making the case to you that it won't. Interestingly enough, when you take out countries like Venezuela, countries like Mexico, countries like Argentina, countries like Russia, and you only include, and when I say homogeneous societies, I mean people who are largely culturally identical. You have a Japanese society, you have the Swedes, Luxembourg, but when you put in more diverse societies that have different collections of people from different parts of the world, all of a sudden you see the statistical mosaic looks different, Joe. The United States all of a sudden doesn't look like, the most violent country in the history of humankind, like some liberals are bent on painting it. Now, why would that benefit their agenda? Because they want to make you believe that we are so incredibly violent that we need to do something special to control firearms here, because if we control firearms here, it will reduce these incredibly violent tendencies that seemingly exist only in the United States. Folks, this is garbage. This is junk. Now, I have another line from this piece, which is good. See, he talks about in the Mises.org piece, they talk about a prejudice about the developed world versus the third world. In other words, Joe, I thought, liberals, their case was that, hey, listen, everybody around the world, we're all God's children. We should all come here. These are all good people. And certainly I agree. Not about the immigration component, but I absolutely believe people all over the world, regardless of the economic status of the world, are all created in God's likeness and image. Well, I agree on that 100%. Yeah, so why the prejudice? Here's an interesting take from the piece. He says, note, however, that these comparisons always employ a carefully selected list of countries. It's important, folks. Most of which are very unlike the United States. They are countries that were settled long ago by the dominant ethnic group. They are ethnically non-diverse today, and they are frequently very small countries, such as Norway, with a population of 5 million. With very locally based democracies, again, unlike the U.S., with an immense population and far fewer representatives in government per voter. Politically, historically, and demographically, the U.S. has little in common with Europe or Japan. So, folks, what the author's trying to say here is say you're doing a survey, Joe, you're doing some kind of a statistical analysis on the effect of a new drug. Yeah. And you want to compare two groups. You want to compare it to two groups that either the effects are randomized over the two groups, but you want to make sure they're two similar groups of people. You don't want to, especially when it comes to sociological research and that kind of, which is having a replicability crisis, by the way, reproducibility crisis. You want to compare groups that are similar because you may be getting effects that are different from the effects you intended based on the differences in the group, not in the differences in the treatment.
Let's compare apples to apples.
Apples to apples. So in other words, yeah, exactly, Joe. You may just be getting an effect from the drug that's due to the cultural differences or some kind of biological difference based on the homogeneity of the population rather than the effect of the drug. I hope I'm not losing anybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're cool.
You want to compare basically similar societies here. Do you notice, however, all of these studies that are done on this, they eliminate the more diverse populations and other, and they take other factors out of the equation. The reason they're doing this, folks, is to make us look a lot worse, to make us look like a really violent society. Right. More interesting about the data is when you compare the United States to places like Mexico, Venezuela, Russia, and Argentina, and other places, Joe, what's fascinating is these places have more restrictive gun laws in many cases than the United States in general. Remember, they vary by state. Right. They have more restrictive gun laws, and they are more violent. They have more gun deaths. So how exactly, I'm not sure how that makes your argument. I'm not sure how that buttresses the left's argument that somehow more restrictive gun regulations and rules and laws are going to make it safer by comparing it to countries around the world. When you compare it to countries around the world and you do a proper analysis and you don't eliminate the countries that don't make your argument, which is what they do, you find that the United States, even though in total has some less restrictive gun laws than some of these other countries, they actually have lower gun death rates. Folks, that is exactly the opposite of the argument the left wants you to believe. You understand that? it's the opposite. They're not the left's argument falls apart. It collapses there. Now, let me see another part of the piece, which is really good. I have a couple of them in there today in the show notes on firearms and gun laws that I think are really interesting. Here's another one. The way they measure gun deaths. Folks, a large proportion of these gun deaths are not, in fact,